Hello all. Today we'll be presenting on gender discrimination at Pinterest. Our presenters today are Suji, David, Nozomi, Santino, Liberty, and Josephine. Next slide, please. For our presentation today, we will be addressing how informal decision-making has contributed to gender discrimination at Pinterest. This could be seen through relationship building processes as well as informal decision-making, which oftentimes exclude women. We have conducted an interview through which the experiences of former COO Francois Brugger will aid us in gathering a better understanding of Pinterest company culture. As secondary data, we'll be using information that has been previously collected on the subject at hand. Our hope for our presentation is to analyze the company's culture in order to either prove or disprove our hypothesis. Next slide, please.
The relevance of social media networks drove our group's attention to studying Pinterest. Next slide, please. Next. Pinterest describes itself as a visual discovery engine for finding, sharing, and saving ideas to spark inspiration. Its main customers are women, comprising 60% of global customers, and its mission is to bring everyone the inspiration to create a life they love. Next, please. At Pinterest, inclusion and diversity are encouraged through Pinterest communities, which are employee-run groups that stimulate community building. These include Women Ad, Blackboard Ad, Filipinos Ad, and more. Next, please.
So with the following information, we have now narrowed down our topic of focus and description of the research question. Next, please. Again, the issue of importance is gender discrimination, specifically the disconnect and imbalance of such within the company. The case which we will be covering is based on, again, Ms. Francois Brugger, former Pinterest COO, who was fired. She states that Pinterest's reason for the firing was due to a lack of collaboration and not necessarily her work performance. She, however, believes that it was her willingness to speak up about the rampant discrimination, hostile work environment, and misogyny within the company that ultimately resulted in her firing. Next, please. So in line with this, the topics of focus are the following: organizational culture, leadership, conflict, and diversity.
So we decided our people-focused research questions to be, how did exclusionary decision-making contribute to gender discrimination? In order for Pinterest to grow and be sustainable as a company, it is crucial to identify and address the people-focused challenges. Nowadays, consumers tend to value and associate companies with the company's stance on social issues. Therefore, it is important for Pinterest to align employee behaviors to what they advertise themselves to be on its platform. From time to time, it is beneficial for the company to take a step back and look inward in order to figure out what changes the organization can make to improve overall.
Research question analysis. As an answer to our research question, we found our people-focused testable hypothesis to be this: more informal decision-making increases gender discrimination than formal decision-making at Pinterest. We found that three course topics in particular provide the best rationale for our research question. The first is decision-making. We are interested in understanding how informal decision-making is pursued. There are common problems in decision-making that can arise. One is groupthink, which highlights the tendency to conform to the consensus viewpoint. Likewise, the Abilene paradox illustrates how people collectively decide to pursue a specific course of action that is counter to the preferences of the majority of the people in the group. For example, a manager may decide on a course of action that is not preferred by the group members. The second framework is culture. We are interested in understanding how and what affects decision-making and the degree of formality at Pinterest. It is particularly important to understand this framework as culture is composed of the values, beliefs, attitudes, and expected behavior within the company. Pinterest values diversity and continuously makes efforts to make sure they are living up to their commitment. Yet, by way of the iceberg model, this might be one of the artifacts or espoused values, because there's a possibility that deeper levels of the iceberg illustrate otherwise. Our third rationale is conflict. We are interested in understanding why decisions are formal versus informal, and why is there exclusion at Pinterest. There are three types of conflicts to be aware of when considering our question. Process conflict is about the strategy of completing the task, and task conflict is about the specific work being done. And relationship conflict or interpersonal conflict are disagreements based on social issues, unrelated to the task at hand. Lastly, relationship or interpersonal conflict might be particularly important for understanding why exclusion and informality persist in the workplace at Pinterest. We want to think about what about the relationship with the individual, perhaps one of a different gender, contributes to their exclusion or different treatment at Pinterest. How does the informal culture or work setting assist with this treatment? This is our comparative mechanism for evaluating our hypothesis. Informal decision-making is more likely than formal decision-making to be exclusionary, which increases gender discrimination.
So now we move on to our hypothesis testing. And you see that we get our sources from published testimonies, from major news stories that have come out recently, as well as from Glassdoor reviews to get a better view of what the atmosphere within Pinterest is like on a daily basis. So in order to prove our hypothesis, we segmented it and broke it up into two pieces, each of which has to be proved in each case in order for the whole hypothesis to be true. So the first part is that gender discrimination exists at Pinterest. And the second part is that gender discrimination at Pinterest is caused by informal decision-making. So our first testimony comes from Francois Brouwer, who's the former Pinterest COO. And she was fired last year ostensibly for failing to meet her revenue targets. And she wrote a hard-hitting article in August of last year and spoke about being pushed towards becoming known as a diversity advocate, rather than for her business accomplishments. She also wrote about how she noticed that decisions were always being made by some informal groups that were invariably male. And with these two details alone, we can conclude that, at least in this case, both sections of the hypothesis are proven. Now with Ozoma and Banks's case, in the popular Washington Post story, it was revealed that these two Black women quit their jobs at Pinterest following pushback against their efforts to implement social justice reforms at the company. However, their testimonies did not mention informal decision-making. So therefore, while their testimonies prove the existence of discrimination, it does not prove that it is caused by informal groups. In this last case, we analyzed Glassdoor reviews and came away with solid evidence of sexual discrimination, thanks to many reviews mentioning a strong bro culture. However, informal decision-making, while mentioned, was hardly spoken on. So this actually led us to the idea that maybe informal decision-making might affect you differently, depending on how high or low you are within a company's hierarchy. Now, on this slide, we have a model demonstrating why informal groups are causing discrimination, and why where one is within the hierarchy might have something to do with it. So on the right, on the left, we have a little flow chart showing how high decision-making power can be funneled toward informal or formal groups. So concentrating power in informal groups could cut off the flow of ideas, which means lower quality ideas that often serve a personal agenda. And it also fosters an atmosphere of mistrust. And to the right of that, we have the formal groups, which are the exact opposite and have much more welcoming systems of input and result in higher quality ideas. Then on the far right, we demonstrate the previous insight that while workers farther down the totem pole also suffer from gender discrimination, it may not actually have anything to do with informal decision-making because they don't have that power or are not around that power in the first place.
So now we're going to talk about the refinement of our hypothesis and mechanisms. Next, please. As seen by the evidence gathered, informal decision-making does affect gender discrimination. However, this relationship depends on the employee's status within the company, and especially, there is a stronger relationship between the degree of informal decision-making and gender discrimination when employees work at the top ladder of the company. This is because decision-making is more relevant to their job.
In terms of the mechanisms themselves, our research showed that informal decision-making is in fact more likely than formal decision-making to be exclusionary. This does increase gender discrimination for only C-suite employees, not necessarily all employees within the company itself. Next, please.
Now, in conclusion, next slide, please. In conclusion, although decision-making fuels discrimination, it may only do so to a certain extent. It in fact only affects the more higher up employees. Therefore, it cannot be the sole and principal reason for gender discrimination at Pinterest. Next, please.
And as for limitations, it is clear that there are other factors that have played a role in Pinterest's overall culture, such as inequitable hiring practices, inadequate leadership, and to identify more factors, further investigation will be required. As for future directions, it is very important to consider incidents that have already happened in the past to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself, and perspectives from women employees with different cultural backgrounds and working in different positions. And also by implementing positive changes that are going to help the company for the long run.
Now, the recommendations that we have come up with are that there shouldn't be any more meetings after the official meetings, just so they don't run the risk of disproportionately prioritizing certain employees over others. Our second recommendation is that although the hiring of women doesn't seem to be a prominent issue at Pinterest, it is the exclusion of women in meetings that is the greater issue. Therefore, we would make C-suite employees' attendance mandatory. Thank you. Next slide.
And these are the works cited. Thank you.